In the early to mid 1990s, a young man in Cornwall, England named Richard James managed to change electronic music from a genre that was rigidly confined to nightclubs and maybe the occasional cheesy TV or film score into literally the most far-reaching, imaginative, and innovative music of the decade. By the way, I'm not being hyperbolic at all. If anything, I'm actually understating this man's impact on music in general, and there are very few people who would disagree with me.
A madman of sound and process. He's been a big influence in Nine Inch Nails camp.
Music today, for me, I think he's definitely the pioneer. Aphex Twin is the king.
People called Aphex twins, okay? I didn't know anything about them. I start hearing like the weirdest noises. I felt violated, like my soul was violated.
In this video, we're going to have a look at something that most electronic musicians have only speculated on. What software was Aphex Twin using in the peak period of his career? And I'm so excited to make this video because I can almost guarantee that if you're into experimental audio stuff, you're going to fall down a deep, deep rabbit hole with at least one of the things covered in this video. Before I became an obnoxious YouTuber, the most common question that I would get from other musicians that I met when I toured or seldomly checked Facebook messages was, what software do you use to make the flashbulb music? A part of me kind of hates this question because sometimes it carries the unintentional suggestion that there's some secret tool out there that made all of my music rather than the countless hours of experimenting and editing and learning until my eyes and ears bled. And Richard James has more focus and determination and imagination in his pinky than all of my body does, than most musicians do. And you're about to find out that this video isn't about the software that you can use to sound more like Aphex Twin. It's attempting to showcase how much of a genius Aphex Twin is, which I personally think is more inspiring as a musician. So let's dive right in with an instant classic. When I first got my hands on the Windowlicker EP in 1999, I just didn't understand. And I didn't like it all that much either, with the exception of the final track, Nanu, because it's just pretty simple and melodic. It took a lot of re-listens before it started growing on me because it was frankly so far away from anything that I had ever heard before that there was just no way to easily digest it. It turns out that the other two tracks on the Windowlicker EP weren't performed or programmed as much as they were painted. Richard primarily used UI Software's Metasynth, which is still being updated and sold 25 years later. Metasynth more or less allows you to use sound as your medium, and then color represents panning. And once you manage to make a sonic image that you like, you can sequence it, among others, in software called XX. And Metasynth is much more obvious and prominent on the second song on that EP, which is titled... Pitchfork had claimed that it's related to a Fourier transform equation. Some others have speculated that it's an algorithm that Richard uses in music production, but there's a far-end crosstalk in there, which is more of a communications thing, or at the very least, not something solely related to software. So I think it's just a kooky song title for a kooky song. Anyway, just search Aphex Twin Math or Aphex Twin Equation if you want to hear it. I made a long video about Metasynth some years ago, but let's just have a quick look at its core functionality. So nowadays in Metasynth, there's a whole onboard synthesizer that's actually quite powerful. However, in 1999, this was not a thing. So I'm going to choose exponential tuning, and then I'm going to load a sampler. So I'm just drawing a French horn. So to add reverb to them, you could just blur one end of the image. All right, I'm going to make a beat. It's like a good sneeze. Sad beat. Okay, so now we have it synthesized and we could bring it into our effects room. That's pretty chaotic. I don't know when Metasynth got an effects tab, but I did have Metasynth in like 2005 or something, and it had it then, and I guess it probably had it during the Windowlicker era. Minor natural filter. I'm going to load in a hi-hat loop. And then I'm going to analyze that spectrum. And it should now play it with that voice. That's a good Aphex pose, I suppose. Beautiful. Let's drag this into Audition and see if I can see my face. All these lines here is because I didn't entirely use exponential mode in Metasynth, but you could see my eyes, and my nose, and my smile. Good Lord. Wow. Yeah, this is a quarter of a century ago when this track was made. And you could still probably get this same result from even the Spotify version or something. I'm fairly certain that I could be locked in a room for a month with the much more featured modern version of Metasynth, and I still would not come close to making anything that sounds as structured or frankly as awesome as this. Aphex Twin's most popular music, or at least the music that brushed up against popular culture at the time, really never represented the aura of his other work that well. I heard the infamously distorted Come to Daddy Pappy Mix single right before the EP was released, and I was kind of taken back a little bit. Little did I know that the full Come to Daddy EP or mini album itself would become what is probably the most innovative and influential album in all of electronic music. The second track alone, Flim, is one of the most beautiful, heartbreaking, deeply thematic melodies I've ever heard in my life, and the drum programming has become a common upper-tier goal of real-live drummers to emulate. And we will dive into how that was made later in this video, but the peak of this album, and probably peak Aphex Twin for most people, would be Bucephalus Bouncing Ball, which means ox-headed bouncing ball, in case you were curious. And in the middle of the song, it becomes apparent to us the sound that is making up most of the crazy sounds in the rest of the song. A ball being dropped on a hard surface. The audio of this sample is eventually torn apart in ways that nobody had ever heard before, and it's recycled into new, completely batshit insane sequences. The thing is, in 1997, there really wasn't a graphical destructive wave editor that could do this. Cool Edit existed back in 1994, but the powerful sound design features didn't arrive until at least Cool Edit Pro in 1998. What we're hearing in Bucephalus Bouncing Ball is Composer's desktop project, which I believe did not have a GUI or front end at the time. It ran on Atari ST initially and then later was ported to Microsoft DOS in 1995. CDP has easily been one of the most powerful pieces of software for sound design, and while it's now freeware, it still has functionality that I've not seen in any other software. Fortunately, over the years, third-party front ends have been developed that make it a little bit more accessible and allow us to play around with newer builds of CDP. Unfortunately, it's going to feel extremely dated and frustrating compared to the user interface of modern software. There's Soundloom, which I never really clicked with. There's Sound Shaper, which is almost tolerable. There's also Process Pack, Grain Mill and BRK Edit, Shimmer, Tabula Vigilans, and so on. Yes, in case you were wondering, a 100% free sound design portal is opening up in front of you right now. So at least pause this video and give your family a big hug and kiss and let them know that you'll miss them before going on this epic voyage. All right, so I have a file called ball.wave. It's just a basketball bouncing. Now, Composer's desktop project is originally command-based. It didn't have a GUI at all. So after setting up your system environment, which isn't really all that difficult, you would just type reverb, ball.wave as your in file. Your out file would be like ballverby.wave. Then you would have a bunch of parameters after that. So you would have your early reflection gain. You would have your mix. I'll put that as 0.7. You would have your reverb time. I'll put that for 2 seconds. You would have your absorption. I'll put that at 0.5. You would have your low pass frequency. I'll put that at 700, meaning 700 hertz. And then you would have your trail time. And I'll put that at like 3.3 seconds. All right, and then you press enter. And now let's hear it. Probably the most difficult way that you could put reverb on anything in 2024, but fear not, there is a GUI. Sound Shaper just feels very Windows 98. No folder memory, that's always good. So for example, blur frequencies. You set the factor, every frequency above 430 hertz, and then low cut under 100, render. And the result, while not beautiful sounding, is kind of unlike anything that you could get from any other software, which is what makes it so exciting. This is quantize, and you can load a text file to customize how it's quantized. Freeze all of these steps a little bit. Golly, I have no idea what any of this is. But now you might be able to see how a brilliant man nearly 30 years ago recorded a marble dropping on a glass table, and then without this GUI, typed in a bunch of commands into DOS and subjecting himself to hours, days, maybe even weeks of trial and error. And now you may start to understand how the masterpiece Bucephalus Bouncing Ball was created. If you're really confused here and you want some heavy prep on CDP, Trevor Wishart's 1994 book, Audible Design, has a lot of diagrams that can help you understand the core of what CDP does. And if you're familiar with Bucephalus Bouncing Ball, you might be wondering what CDP sound generator is creating those low bit modulated noises in the song. This one is easy and fun. As one might expect, some of Aphex Twin's older music was programmed on outboard gear, but when a computer was used, it was typically running software called Dr. T's Tiger Cub. Seriously. I spent 2 long days trying to get this software to run in an emulator and had no success. However, I did find some videos of some folks who did have some success, both with the original hardware and emulators. I salute y'all for your patience. Really inspiring stuff.
What a lot of rubbish.
Story time. Ages ago, when I was on tour with Dillinger Escape Plan, their drummer at the time, Chris Penny, made a remark to me that he likes how my music and Aphex Twin's music so often has linear drumming. And I didn't know what that meant, and he explained to me that it simply means only one sound at a time. Much later, I would come to realize that Chris Penny is one of the best linear drummers of all time. But in my electronic musician brain, it just meant that I set a drum kit to monophonic, or I used the same mute or choke group for every single sound. And that's something I almost always did back then, and I still do it quite frequently. This video would be where you could see how that worked. All right. Do you know who else frequently uses linear drum programming? Tracker users. Trackers were originally a very efficient way to make computer music and are sequenced in top-down lines that can only play one voice at a time per line. So if you crammed your entire drum track into a tracker lane, it would be linear. This next statement is entirely speculative, by the way, but for the type of music you hear in the Richard D. James album, for example, it's hard for me to imagine that it wasn't a tracker triggering a SCSI sampler for the drums. In 1995, trackers weren't quite capable of playing a bunch of fast 16-bit sounds, but what did exist in 1994 was Recycle, which is Propellerhead's first software product. Recycle was extremely innovative at the time, and it allowed you to detect peaks and transients in sound files, like a drum break, for example, and then send and route the individual sounds to a SCSI sampler like the Akai S2000. What I can say for certain is that the similarly melodic and intricately programmed song Vordhosbn from the 2001 Drux album was using Player Pro on a Mac for the melody. Here's a clip of, presumably, the original session shared by Richard himself, and I cannot express how difficult it must have been to make a melody this purposeful and provocative on this software. And as you can see, the polyphony, or the thing allowing more than one note to be played at the same time, is accomplished by splitting them up into separate lanes. This melody, which would be simple enough on a piano, is an example of a tracker's weakness. Not for Aphex Twin though, he breezes right through it and makes it look easy. Let's make a very quick, rudimentary, and probably shitty sounding version of an Aphex Twin tracker song.
Fulton County in the second left lane on 85 South past exit 61.
I actually was initially planning on making a shitty version of Flim or Vordhosbn on the Polygon tracker for this video, and then I discovered that a fellow audio YouTuber, Digifex Electronics, did this 2 years ago and pretty much killed it. If you own a tracker or a tracker mini or this thing that hasn't been announced yet, you can get it all from his Patreon. All of these links are in the description. One thing that I'm skipping here in Aphex Twin's softwareography is almost certainly plenty of Super Collider, which to this day is an updated and free high-level audio programming language. It was originally created in 1996 by James McCartney, who allegedly had visited Richard in London in a sort of private software collaboration tutorial thing. What that software was like is anyone's guess. However, one of Richard's roommates in this period was fellow Reflex artist Sylob, or Chris Jeffs. Chris made and makes music on his own software that he created in Super Collider. He called the software Sylob Music System, and he used it when he played live as well. And when I toured with him in the early to mid 2000s, he showed me how the software worked, and it was some next level stuff that definitely did not exist outside of his own computer. One particular piece of this software that totally blew me away, that I still think about all the time, was a TB303 style vocal sequencer with text-to-speech functionality. And that was like 20 years ago. I had the pleasure of chatting with Richard for quite a bit earlier today, and he gave me a long list of tools, some of which I frankly have never even heard of, some I forgot about, and unfortunately, some of them cannot be run on modern computers, but some of them can, and the whole reason I'm making this video in the first place is an attempt to expand my viewers' palette of tools off of the beaten path territory, so please, try to run some of this stuff and experiment. So the Player Pro tracker that you saw a teeny bit of earlier didn't support VST plugins or anything like that, but it did allow you to execute code for custom synths and whatnot, and I had no idea this was a thing. And despite it being pretty difficult to get Player Pro running on anything these days, this is one of those details that may have been lost in history unless some jagoff said it on YouTube. One of the programs that caught me by surprise was Pratt, which I never even considered using in any creative way. I had it installed for voice printing for forensic audio work, and I don't think I ever actually used it for that, but I just had it installed and learned it a bit. But it turns out that there's a whole lot of exploring you could do with the voice synthesis and whatnot, and I'm excited to check that out in the future. One thing that Richard told me about that I simply cannot believe that I've never heard about previously, and I am literally obsessed with now, is UPick, which was designed by Yannis Anakis, and holy shit, I've never wanted to play with a synthesizer more in my entire life.
Instrumentalists, instrument makers, musicologists, But also, physicists and mathematicians will find in the system a host of possibilities for experimental application.
Speaking of things I had never even known existed, when Richard was a teenager, he was using an add-on for the ZX Spectrum called RAM Music Machine, which had MIDI in and out, and it even supported very low-resolution sampling. News to me. Finally, unsurprisingly, he used a lot of stuff from Urcam, and without getting into specifics, you should just go down the Urcam Labs rabbit hole, as I cannot think of a more dedicated group of researchers and developers focusing on music and audio technology, and frankly, it's surprising that I've not done a video on Urcam software yet, and I'm sure I will in the very near future. So while some of the things that we covered in this video is old and inaccessible now, a lot of it is accessible and a lot of it is free, which gives you no excuse to not try and get it running and play with it yourself. And if you do, please let us see your results in the comments, because again, that's why I'm making this video. After Drux came out in 2001, the Aphex Twin would go on a 13-year hiatus. Richard James did not. He amassed a ludicrous amount of analog gear and released over 5 hours of music and as many as 15 different releases under alternate aliases before releasing Cyro in 2014. But I had quite a few debates with other longtime Aphex Twin fans who thought that he had lost something from his peak years. I completely disagree. I think Aphex Twin's peak is defined by the listener, and I think we lost something in that period. For example, do you remember earlier when I said that I didn't really like Windowlicker when it first came out? Well, I paid good money for it at the time, and I had trusted that I would eventually hear something that I didn't hear in the first few listens, and holy shit, I 100% did. I have no idea how many listens it took for me to personally declare to myself that the Richard D. James album or Come to Daddy are among the most innovative albums ever made, but it certainly wasn't the first impression I had when listening to them. At the risk of morphing into Rick Beato before your eyes, I do have to point this out, we just don't have that listening experience anymore. When we evolved from having to take the bus to a bunch of different music stores to find an obscure and overpriced experimental electronic music CD, all the way to a song just being fed to us on the Spotify algorithm, we lost patience. And we lost the obsessive-focused mindfuck that came with an Aphex Twin album in the 1990s. But do you know why nobody has accurately reverse-engineered or deconstructed or recreated any of the music that Richard James has released in the last 15 years? It's because it's ahead of its time, it's next level, and nobody knows what the fuck is going on in those songs. When I was in my early teens, I was an awkward jazz guitarist programming Buddy Rich and Gene Krupa solos on a drum machine in South Chicago while house music was taking off. It's hard to overstate how popular electronic music was in Chicago at that time, but electronic music was remixes of the Speed Racer theme or somebody saying, "It's time for the percolator," over and over for 20 minutes to a 4/4 beat. I loved creatively programming drum machines and synthesizers to do things that humans couldn't. But I was ashamed to show my music to anybody because of the stigma of making electronic music that didn't work in a dance club. That is until I heard Aphex Twin, and then I realized that I indeed can do whatever I want. And there are thousands of musicians who benefited from the same young parasocial relationship with Richard's music in that period. If there's a takeaway from this video, other than a bunch of cool software to check out, it would be the overall attitude of Richard James. For some reason or another, he has no creative boundaries at all. His music sounds 100% like someone exploring for their own benefit, not like something that is made to appeal to others or please Spotify's algorithm or get used in TikToks. I'm sorry. You or I will never sound like Aphex Twin, but we can appreciate that he did the hard work for us by showing the world that there doesn't have to be any rules in electronic music, or music at all. And on that note, by the time you're seeing this, I'm probably renovating a new studio, so I'd better put on my work boots and get out of here. By the way, let me talk about my sponsor really fast. It's you. If you enjoyed this and you want to see more like it, consider joining my Patreon. I have loads of unreleased and released music, audio assets, field recordings, and a really positive community. You don't see those on the internet anymore. And I have monthly songwriting challenges. It's great. You should totally join. It's as little as $1. Thanks for watching. Do not stop creating. Bye.